Okay, week 3, lesson 2, we're going to look at some ratios. Okay, our first ratio is going to be debt to equity, basically an indicator of how much money the owners have in the company compared to lenders. Okay, or actually the other way around, lenders compared to owners. It's one of those backwards ratios. If they're really wanting to do things correctly, would have called it equity to debt, but somewhere along the way we got debt to equity. So basically it's a comparison of what the banks and lenders have in the company compared to what the owners have in the company. Okay. Return on equity is an indication of profits on the shareholders' investment. So shareholders invest in the company. From the company's point of view, that's a financing activity. So the company gets money from shareholders. Return on assets, that's an indication of the profits on the company's investment. So we're looking at return on equity, the shareholders' investment, return on assets, the company's investment. Both of those are basically a derivative, or the idea is that each party wants return on investment. So we're talking about money back. Anytime we mention the word return, we're talking about getting money back for an investment. And as well, we're usually talking about a percentage, okay? A percentage, so kind of like net profit percent, net margin percent, return on equity, return on assets, and if we use the return on investment notion, we're looking for a percentage, not the actual dollar value, okay? So the percentage of our return on investment. Okay, so debt to equity is basically the idea of total debt compared to total equity. This one is just a number. It's not a return or anything like that. It's like our current ratio and our quick ratio, just a number. Good or reasonable number is 1 to 2 for small business. Years ago, Lehman Brothers, big investment bank, had a debt to equity number of 35 to 1. Okay, 35 to 1. So not only was it backwards in terms of 1 to 2, i.e. the equity is typically the bigger number, it's reversed and it's 35 to 1. So if I was going to multiply the numbers together, that means the Lehman Brothers debt to equity was 70 times out of whack. Okay, 70 times. So because of that, and if we follow that link, it gives you a big long article, but the meaning of it is basically in this quote. The company itself only owned $1 out of every $36 in its bank account. So it had $1 in equity for every $35 in debt. They borrowed it from someplace else. So if they lost the money on the 3%, it would have meant the loss of all the money it had in the company. Okay. Say, well, gee, from my point of view as running a company, that's pretty good. Yeah, except that you really have to pay debt back, and lenders are looking for payments on their debt. So the company itself didn't have much money involved. And part of that was because they got away with a lot of financing bluster, I guess, for lack of a better word. And everybody said, well, we have to keep playing the game because Lehman Brothers is too big to fail. And then, as it turned out, they weren't too big to fail and subsequently became bankrupt. Now, if you're not Lehman Brothers, bankers are very interested in this ratio for a couple of reasons. They want to know that you've got basically twice as much skin in the game as they do. Okay? So when you go and get a loan, they might look at your ratio and go, okay, well, the only way we're going to lend you money is if you personally put more money in the company, if you buy some shares. Okay? If you have an existing loan, somewhere in the loan might be in a paragraph or a clause that says you can't go beyond the 1 to 2 debt to ratio. And if that happens, the bank might say, okay, we want our money, well, they'll give you 48 hours to give you the money, maybe 30 days if you're really, really lucky. That's called call. They're going to call your loan. Or, same idea, they might get you to put in more equity. Okay? So that's a condition or term or covenant that you agree to when you get the loan. And it's a contract. So that's something you might have to honor. Okay, return on assets. I already mentioned it's an investment. Return on assets is an investment by the company. So we have, for instance, Oh, name an investment, John. Inventory, um, plant and buildings, equipment, whatever the case may be. Our return on assets is defined as our net profit by total assets. I'm going at the second paragraph here, or the second orange bar. And it's a return on assets, so it's a percent. Okay, so just make sure that you've got that down. Then return on equity is net profit divided by total equity. So how do we make return on equity better? A higher number is a better number in this case. Well, return on equity, a better number, a higher number, means we increase the net profit. Okay, we increase the net profit. Now, the other part of this equation is we can lower the total equity in the company, but that's something a little bit beyond the course at the moment, what we're going to look at. So just think of the best way to increase the return on equity is to increase the net profit. Same thing with the return on assets. The best way to increase your return on your assets is to increase your net profit. Kind of a simple scenario, but that's the best way to look at it. Now, one of the other things that you'll see on investment pages and report on business and that sort of thing is some analysts will use earnings before interest, taxes, and amortization. Okay, so they use it before interest, takes out, because remember, net profit is earnings after interest, taxes, and amortizations. The EBITDA is before that. So if we get earnings or net profit before interest is taken out, before taxes are taken out, before amortization is taken out, we have a bigger number. Okay, a bigger number. Now, some analysts do this because they say, well, interest is a financing decision. Taxes are the government, so that's not really anything we have control of, and amortization isn't a cash number. So they use EBITDA because they think it gives a truer picture of the return on the assets or on the equity. So these are sort of little finer definitions. For what we're up to, we're just going to use the net profit. It gives a more of a conservative number and more of a number that the average person, including, I'm not going to slag bankers, but including what bankers look for, they typically look at the net profit versus total equity and versus total assets, and so does the average small business investor. Now, again, for the rest of the course, these are some of the ones you should memorize. The orange bars, of course, are the ones to memorize. Don't worry too much about the EBITDA. Understand that it exists, but I'm particularly interested in return on assets and return on equity using the net profit definition. Okay, here's a slide to follow up and largely covers what I said. Measure the return the shareholders are getting on their investment. Okay, in small business, we usually count on something like 10% plus inflation, and that seems to be a good number that makes everybody universally happy. Sorry. Um, it should be above the rate of inflation and then some, as we say in financial circles. How do we make return on equity better? Higher net profits and lower equity or lower money tied up in the company. Okay, and the final slide in this lecture, return on assets, measure return that the company is getting on the investment in assets. Okay, measure the return. Your return on your assets should be more than the cost of a bank loan to get those assets. So my return on assets, let's say a bank loan is 7%, then my return on my assets to finance the return should be higher than the bank rate. So if I've got a 10% return on assets and the bank's only charging me 7%, I'm doing well. It also needs to be higher than the rate of inflation. Okay, so if inflation is 2% and the bank loan is 7%, that adds up to 9%. So we really need to be doing better than 9%. Again, 10% is better or good, but 15 or 20% is even better. How do we make return on assets better? Higher net profit, which usually means we have to manage our assets better. And maybe we have some assets kicking around that we're not using anymore, so maybe we need to sell them off. Again, this is more of a management measurement, more of a management discussion but return on assets is an important little tool. Because the question always comes up, well, if I'm not getting a good return on my assets, maybe I should sell them and start another company. That's the extreme view, but also a pretty valid view from my way of thinking. All right, and again, these are both variations on return on investment. One is the shareholder's investment, the other one is the company's investment.